All right, I won't do an intro today. We'll just get right to it. On Mondays, we like to bring in people from the industry and the gun community whenever possible and chat about their projects and what they've got going on. Today, we have Chris joining us from Federal Ammunition. We met up at SHOT Show this year. Chris is the project manager for 30 Super Carry, fairly new caliber ammunition that's coming out. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you bet. Happy to do it.
So we chatted a little bit before we went live here, but I've got some questions that have come in from people once I put out that we're going to be having this conversation. And if people are out there listening live, of course, you're encouraged to throw questions out there. And I've gotten a couple others. So I guess briefly, let's not assume too much here. If you would, maybe give us a elevator speech for a couple minutes here.
So I guess briefly, let's not assume too much here. If you would, maybe give us a elevator speech.
All right, okay. I'll turn off my own audio here. But if you would, give us a quick kind of rundown, maybe introduce yourself if you would, and then the 30 Super Carry and its history.
Right on. So, yeah, my name's Chris Laack. I'm the product manager for handgun ammunition for Federal CCI and Spear. And so 30 Super Carry started as a project quite a while ago, actually. It took about 3 years in development before we were ready for go, and it started as a challenge, basically for my boss, just going, what if we were going to do a cartridge today, knowing what we know about making handgun ammo, knowing what we do about terminal ballistics, and using the current materials and everything that are available to us. If we were going to do that today, would the cartridge look different than the 100-year-old cartridges that are popular, right? So that's really what started it. Was we sat down with the engineers, said, okay, you've got a blank slate, nothing, clean whiteboard. You don't have to base it on anything. Just if we were going to build a cartridge from the ground up for personal defense specifically, what would it look like? So we took down all the things that would make a good personal defense cartridge and kind of look at all the trade-offs for the ones that are in the market now. And an example would be why somebody would carry 9 instead of 40 or 380 instead of 9, or why some people insist on 45. So it was just kind of an analysis of why people pick the different things that they do. And of course, 9mm is the standard, right? That's kind of become the standard. And basically because it gets you to a point from a terminal effectiveness standpoint that is as practically good as you can get in a handgun, while you still have controllable recoil, you've got decent capacity, and it just makes a practical platform to bring with you, right? And make something that could still be concealed. So it's 9 just has become the standard. So it kind of was okay if knowing that. We know that we can make a 9 really good now, but it took a long time to get there. And what would be a reason somebody wouldn't carry a 9? And it kept coming down to, well, you could either make a gun smaller, or you could make a gun hold more rounds and still be as terminally effective as 9. If we were going to do it from the ground up, right? Like that was the goal, was terminal effectiveness. And that was really kind of what started it there. And those engineers prototyped a handful of different things just with concepts, and we ended up at that 312 diameter bullet because it just proved to work the best. It was the best balance of everything, to where we were hoping we could get kind of close to 9, knowing that gap in terminal performance between 380 and 9mm is actually a bigger gap in terminal effectiveness than between a 9 and a 45 auto. It's significant there just because of how limited the energy is of a 380. So we were going to be happy if we got somewhere in between, and as it turns out, we ended up with something that was every bit as effective as any of the lighter weight 9mm projectiles. So did that kind of sum it up, kind of the why the Super Carry?
Yeah, I think so. Gave me a couple of new questions to ask, but I mean, again, this is 3 years in development, and it's been out for a couple of years now, and I'm sure people have heard about it, if not shot it or looked into it, maybe heard one of your other interviews. That's what I've been listening to, a couple of the other interviews. When you say it took, that it's been in development for 3 years, I guess the question is, when you're talking about bullet development or cartridge development, is it a balance between accuracy and the other characteristics like penetration? Is that, or is that making it too black and white? Is it I'm sure there's trade-offs in balancing, but like, how do you, I know that you mentioned you start with looking at what people prefer, but when it comes to actually putting the sizes down on paper, is it we have to decide what characteristics we're going to enhance?
Yeah, well, and again, we had kind of 9 mm as a reference point, knowing that was the go-to for the majority of law enforcement. So people who actually carry a handgun for defense type purposes, right, for that application for use of force, and so our goal really was, we looked at terminal, and when we say terminal, we're looking at, in a handgun, essentially penetration depth and expansion size, and some variation between those, depending on what you can accomplish by cartridge. So that can vary, right? So we can give up a little bit of upset size to get more penetration depth, or we can give up a little bit of one or the other, depending on what each individual cartridge offers. And then accuracy is there, but that's just kind of a standard. We have kind of a standard accuracy requirement that we try to meet with everything that we can. And again, knowing that certain cartridges have more limitations there, but 30 Super Carry is actually an inherently accurate cartridge. You've got, better sectional density because you've got a narrow, long bullet. So it's actually a more accurate cartridge and a more accurate projectile than what you get out of a 9mm. So that never ended up being a real issue from an accuracy standpoint. You do, as you're looking at grain weights and things like that, it comes up just kind of what's going to be the most effective balance. Again, when we're dealing with, you balance all the parameters and try and figure out what's going to work the best. And that's why we ended up with that 100 grain projectile as the primary for that. It's just, that's what seemed to work the best in different barrel lengths, and to give us a balance of penetration depth and upset size. And we work with what velocities make sense for the cartridge. So in the case of 30 Super Carry, we could push it a little faster, so that just gave us a different parameter to work with than something with a limited velocity potential like a 380. So there, in the 380, for example, you have to give up lots of upset size if you want penetration depth, where in 30 Super Carry, we were able to push it fast enough that we didn't have to give up that much. We can still have 1.5 or greater expansion potential. So
going back to when you said the sectional density, is that something that's a material, or is that a shape of the projectile?
It can be both. In the case of this, we know what the materials are, so it's more in the shape. It's the narrower diameter with the same length as a 9.
So essentially like throwing a football or throwing a dart, and which one's going to have different performance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can get that nice spiral and get it to fly further more accurately, right? Not so much yaw, not so much tumbling and variation like that. It just tends to cut straight through. Yeah.
And when you talk about terminal performance or that, then you probably have to, when you're starting from scratch, you have to look at how much lead, how much material do we need to actually do something on the other end. And you can't get, I'm assuming you can't get much smaller than, a 380 is already pretty small. Most people that I know say to shoot ball in it, so that you have the mass there. So I'm assuming you can't get too small, because then you lose any, it turns into like a 5.7 or something, right? Like a little tiny.
Right. Yeah. And in handgun, you're just, so muzzle energy and velocity are more just the means to the end for us in developing terminal handgun bullets. You actually don't get meaningful contribution to terminal performance in a handgun cartridge because of velocity or energy, right? Those are just the things you use to make a bullet get big and go deep. So that's in 380, you can do a decent sized projectile, just understanding that it doesn't have a lot of energy to give you good penetration depths and upset size. So you just give up upset size. So kind of like you mentioned, ball ammo. We designed the Hydroshock Deep with that in mind. So we just control how big that bullet can expand, so that it leaves more energy for penetration depth after it's achieved its full expansion size. Whereas something like the HST, that bullet gets real big real fast, and you've got to have a cartridge with more energy on hand to allow you to do both. But it's just an important factor there, is that the energy isn't what we track for our wounding potential. The energy is what we use to make the bullet get big and go deep. So,
and get there, I suppose.
yeah.
No, and we've got a question from Weston out there. It's kind of, I'll just throw it out there. What's the optimal barrel length for 30 super carry? And I guess I was going to ask a follow up there. It was a question I was going to ask, or kind of comment, I guess. Once you build a cartridge and even some projectiles and combos for it, some options for it, everyone else is still going to be putting these into their own guns and doing whatever modifications. A gun with the suppressor is different than the small model of a compact model of a gun, and there's even a carbine. So it's going to start going all over the place once it's out in the wild, I suppose.
Right. The big thing is just picking the projectile that's kind of matched to what your use is. And there isn't really a optimal barrel length per se, because we design the loads with the idea of what are they going to be shot through. So for the HST, for example, and the punch, they're designed to work at a very low velocity threshold. So shooting it out of a short barrel gun is no problem. So the right now, the smallest gun out there is the Shield, that Shield Plus from Smith & Wesson. But we have seen data of gun prototypes with even shorter barrels than that. And it's not a problem with that projectile right now. You shoot something like that out of the carbine, and you pick up velocity. What you'll probably see is hyper expansion, where the bullet just expands, like an HST especially expands really fast, and you get shallower penetration depth with really big upsets, right? So you might see penetration depth that's short of 12, but then you're getting 2 times upset, right? So it's just a optimal barrel is going to do with more to do with the actual projectile design than the cartridge itself, right? The cartridge we can optimize for anything. And once there's more carbines in market, we'll do a carbine optimized load for 30 super carry, right? Just once there's more guns to feed it. But something like the Gold Dot would actually do really well in a carbine, just because that bonded bullet is more robust. So it likes being pushed a little harder, just because with that bonding, it's just a really tough bullet. So
we talked a little bit before we started about the different brands, and they've each got their characteristics, I guess, or their what's the word, like their targets. I guess that's fun. So Gold Dot, that's what I typically use, is the protection protection one, but I would call it the hotter. Is that the right term? I don't know if it's the right term.
Well,
technically.
We did a 115 in the Gold Dot with the idea that it helps with 9mm adoption, right? Just people seeing a 115, just thinking that we wanted to do a heavier bullet for the cartridge, just to see if the market liked that better, because it was a little more relatable. But at the end of the day, the 100 and 115, it's going to depend on bullet design, but you don't really gain anything by going to the 115. With the Gold Dot, you gain by getting a bonded bullet. It's really the difference there, where it's just a really tough projectile with that unicore bonding. So it's just a different bullet. So we don't have like a universal bullet that you just put into different cartridges and speed up and slow down. Every one of them is built from the ground up to do what it needs to for that particular cartridge. So,
Well, for the cartridge or for the job it's tasked with? Because
the job it's tasked with within that cartridge specifically, right? So personal defense or duty, we've got a set of technical requirements that have to do with terminal performance, and then we design that bullet to achieve those terminal performance goals within the cartridge, right? So we don't use the same bullet in different calibers or different cartridges. It's designed for that use, knowing what we've got to work with for that cartridge. So.
Let's see. So one of the questions was what bullet options are available or are going to be available for the 30 SC?
So right now we've got the 100 grain HST, and then the slightly heavier, it's a 103 or 104. 103, I think, is what we settled on the punch. And then the punch is a little more universal, and that one we designed based on making it lower recoil. Because what we did have a lot of people commenting on was that with that terminal effectiveness, could we load it something that would be even less recoiling, a little more like a 380 to kind of help with that recoil sensitive person. So we focused on doing that with the punch. And then there's the 115 and the gold dot. We've got some lighter, faster stuff that we're playing with in development. And then I think everything's going to end up being between 85 grain and 115 grain. It's just where it seems to like it. But right now I'm really interested in looking at some lighter, faster stuff just to see what we can do down at that end of what the cartridge offers.
I guess you can tell by sales what people are preferring and how people are using it.
Yep. And as well as once we start getting real world feedback too is the other piece, right? So keeping in mind that our ammo is actually used in more lethal encounters than anybody's from a handgun standpoint. So it has to do with having 70% law enforcement market share and a good chunk of the personal defense market share. Once we start getting more and more feedback, and the other thing is once there's more and more guns, we'll play with loads that are optimized for the additional guns as they go into market, right? Because it's very atypical that an ammunition caliber gets introduced and then the guns come later, which is why we don't do it that often. So as more guns hit the market, it'll depend. For a great example is the carbine, and the comment I hear more than anything now is people are really excited to see a full-size 30 super carry full-size handgun that just fits a ton of rounds in it, right? So something like that hits the market, we'll probably look at doing a new load that's optimized for that application as well. It just gives us different parameters to work with, so why not optimize it?
Exactly. Kind of along those, well, maybe not along those lines. Can the super carry be adopted for other things besides home defense, like competition shooting or hunting? Is it?
Yes, potentially. So competition, we're limited in that they have minimum diameter requirements.
Oh, okay.
And we've talked to them about that. And it was interesting talking to like USPSA, and because we still have to hit power factor, there's no reason to not allow 30 super carry, but they're trying to figure out how to approach it because it does add capability, because they limit you have a minimum requirement and you can go more than that, but as long as you hit that minimum requirement, which is actually pretty low for 9mm as far as power factor. So you could potentially, if you've got a 20 round magazine for 9mm, for example, it would be a 26 round magazine for 30 super carry more than likely. And they're a little bit hesitant because they don't know what the impact would be to the shooting sports if all of a sudden a new caliber came in that allowed 20-25% more capacity in the same guns. So
exactly, and that's what I was going to say. I didn't realize, I don't shoot enough competitive sports, I guess, to realize their caliber diameter issue. But yeah, that was one of the other questions I was going to ask: is how is it going to change the dynamics of competition? maybe something like Steel Challenge or something, or do they care about caliber there as long as it's hitting steel?
Yeah, we'll have to kind of see what the leadership of those competitive sports are comfortable with and how they're interested. They like the cartridge, but it's just kind of when you've got an audience of people who have all spent a bunch of money on especially in open class, right, on the guns and optics and magazines and holsters and all this other stuff. And now somebody comes up with a new cartridge that achieves all the same things but allows 20% more capacity. It changes that whole landscape, and that's significant, right? So whoever has 30 super carry will have a technical advantage over the people that don't, and then it becomes a chasing the gear issue. And I think they're hesitant because of that. I shouldn't say worried about it, but it's just they're mindful of what is this going to mean for the people who are shooting competitively, and does it become unfair if you introduce something like that into the equation?
When you think about it, that's kind of what 9 did to competition. Was a lot of people shooting 45s, and then 9 became the wonder round. So, imagine what would happen with super carry's future. They open it up for competition, and everyone, like you said, starts to chase that. And now it becomes more, well, people are going to assume it into carry a lot easier once they're shooting with it, and it's in gun stores. And like you say, there's more models available. That could really be interesting.
And it would be a significant advantage. Just, I mean, it's more accurate. It's going to have the same power factor, so it'll have the same energy, but we can achieve it in a different way. It's going to knock steel down the same way, right? So it's as a 9, for example. So I was really excited to talk to him about it, and then a little bit disappointed just to hear how hesitant they were. But I do get it, right? Like they're trying to watch out for all the people who compete in the sport and keep it fair, and they have to think about how to do it in the best way for their members of that shooting sport. So, but it is kind of funny, right? Like we kind of got that initial, what's the point of this cartridge? And now that it's funny that the thing holding it back from adoption is how good it would be. So,
certainly. And with the less recoil, I think that would be another advantage for competition shooting.
Shots. You can design some low recoiling 9s, but the energy is different with something like this. So yeah, you could achieve it in a different way that would be even more effective. So,
a question that I don't know if it's going to fit in anywhere, but it was one of the questions that was asked: Is there any data, or have you worked with suppressors at all? How does 30 super carry work with suppressors?
It works just fine, other than it is supersonic, right? So we haven't worked on any kind of subsonic loads for it, but out of a full length gun, it's going to be supersonic. But there's no reason you couldn't shoot it through a suppressor. I've only shot it through a 9mm suppressor, and it's hearing safe, but I didn't have any devices to record the decibel level other than we knew it was hearing safe. So it works just fine, but yeah, it is a supersonic load. So,
but again, it sounds like if it's 8 years in the future and some kind of suppressed competition is the fad, then you could just tune it up to be a subsonic.
Oh yeah. If you loaded it to be subsonic, it would be awesome, right? It's just like it's the difference between shooting a supersonic 9 and a subsonic 9. It sounds about the same as a supersonic 9 does. You get that same crack, but the actual volume to the shooter isn't that much different.
So I guess I'm switching gears here a bit to one that I had a question about. I don't know. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, if you're making 100 pounds of something or 100 pounds of something else, you're still using 100 pounds. But is there any issue with less materials being used? Does it like lend itself to less cost to the end user or something with going smaller in some of the components like lead?
Potentially,
it's not huge difference, but it is smaller.
Yeah, potentially for reloaders where your and overhead and all the other stuff in, they might see some cost advantage once they're starting to reclaim brass and shoot once fired brass and stuff. But from our standpoint, no, just we priced it intentionally right where 380 was from a target ammo standpoint, and of course 380 has less material than 9 but costs more, and that's just a matter of volume scale, right? Because the 380 doesn't run as well in the equipment, and you don't have as much demand for it, so you're never going to get the same cost to manufacture as you will with 9. So it'll always cost a little bit more. But that being said, yeah, kind of to your point, the bullets are probably going to be less expensive because of material costs if somebody's buying them for reloading purposes.
At least compared to like a 45 or something bigger.
Yeah, definitely compared to that. Yeah.
So that couple of, go ahead.
Oh, that's from a loaded ammunition standpoint. The hollow points cost the same from us in 9, 380, and 30 super carry. So the HST price to buy them federal to a distributor or a dealer in HST is the same between those three, because those are all very purpose built. They run slow on the equipment anyway because we're doing primer seal and all the other stuff on it, right? So you don't see the volume differences. It was just in target ammo where 30 super carry costs what 380 does essentially.
So the question I was going to ask is, when you're developing a new round, when or where does reloading come into the equation, or if it does it?
Well, we factored it in. RCBS did dies right away. Generally, you're going to wait until for sure it was SAMI approved, right? Because we launched it before it was actually SAMI approved. So there's not a requirement to have it be SAMI approved. It's just smart to have a standardized, accepted set of parameters for the cartridge. But once that happens, then anybody can do whatever they want with it, because now there's an industry standard for it. And, Hornady does a load, and people are free to kind of do what they want. Because it's 312 diameter, it's a common size out there in the market. So there's projectiles that people can play with. We're looking at doing unfired brass as a component and shipping that out. But really, it's not a priority for us until, again, there's more guns and things like that out in the market. Right. But we will do it eventually. We'll offer the target bullets and stuff like that too. We're probably not going to offer the terminal bullets because we can pretty much sell through all of our capacity to make those bullets without doing them as components, just feeding loaded ammo. So we probably won't do those as components, but the target bullets we will. And then it's a matter of, there's a lot of work behind the scenes developing the loads, right? Because if we're going to offer components with the purpose of them being used for reloading, then we have to offer some suggested recipes, right? So, and that takes time to establish that stuff. And our guys are just a little bit behind on those types of projects. So.
Well, I'm definitely curious about that kind of stuff. The when you talk about, well, I guess that's maybe a topic for a different day. But I'm always curious about the development of ammo. I guess I'm looking at my questions here, trying to put them in some kind of order. I'm going to ask this one next. How might the development of 30 Super Carry influence future designs and development? Like, did you learn something from it, or is this going to apply to a new? I guess rifle ammo is a little bit more, where it's more common to see a new rifle round come along. But
yeah, there's more ways. There's more different things you can do in rifle just because the physics supports it, right? You got a lot more to work with. In handgun, there's not a whole lot new you can do. So we did learn a ton, and a lot of it just has to do with what the current machining or manufacturing capabilities are for ammunition and for the gun companies too. So we learned a lot of stuff in the development of Super Carry. and I don't know how much it would lead towards development of new cartridges, but it certainly could lead to new development of loads for current cartridges that are out there. Because we just learned a ton in the development of it. Things that we could actually figure out how to make 9 even better, just because it forced us to think outside the box a little bit to accomplish what we needed to. So,
Oh, that's an interesting like side effect or consequence of the project. Then that you kind of come up with new, I guess, new points of view on it.
yeah,
Makes sense though. If you haven't actually sat down to create something from scratch and you've just been working with existing parameters, it gives you that, like you say, a different perspective completely on it.
yeah, it's good because it forces you outside the box that you're used to working in, right? And you start to see things a different way. And the other thing is, when you're starting from the ground up inventing a cartridge, you really got to know what you're doing. So you got to be really good at what you're doing. You got to be you got to really understand everything that you're working with. I mean, 30 Super Carry uses small rifle primers, right? So you don't have to, but that's what we did, just to make sure that we had something that was going to be effective at the pressures that we were working with, and it worked great. So.
And is that going to be easier for reloaders then potentially?
I don't know. It could be, but I think if I remember correctly, small rifle primers are getting a little bit easier to find, but that's really has to do more with how things are going in the market, because
Yeah.
we crank them out 24/7. So it really all I know is we're making as many as we can every day of the week. So, but the market fluctuation is been largely just to do with demand and how far people have gotten behind, and the fact that we are, of course, OEM suppliers of primers to most of the other small manufacturers in the market. So it could be in that, from a reloading standpoint with Super Carry, because you could use either a pistol primer or small rifle primer in it, depending on what you're trying to do with the load. So you might not be building a high pressure load like what we do. So.
When you talked earlier about the production of them, in my experience, just as a reloader doing 380 or 9, like you say, they're kind of more tedious. I'm assuming even on the big equipment, they just have more issues and probably take more manpower to keep everything running than something larger. But is the Super Carry any easier than 9 or 380 with its case length, or is there any other? Was that a consideration when you're starting from scratch like that? Thinking about how it's going to actually be constructed?
Well, we need to be able to make it, but as far as trying to get an advantage in making it, no, not so much. The focus is really on what it's going to do for the end user, and then we'll figure out the rest from there. So ideally, we don't want it to be harder to build, right? But it's not. It needs to be buildable, but we don't need to have an improvement for it to make sense.
Right on. Ozzy had commented earlier out in the chat, once you get over 1,200 feet PS, you really need a bonded round. Somebody's talking about the gold dot.
Not necessarily, no. I mean, you can. It depends on what you mean by bonded round, too. I mean, chemically bonded has a distinct advantage. Mechanically bonded, and when I say mechanically, I'm talking more like cantilures locking to the jacket to the core, is going to be completely effective over 1250 if you design the bullet accordingly, right? So it takes a few more whacks at it in development to get it right, but you can mechanically lock the jacket to core. You get it there by controlling expansion, right? So how fast does it get big, and how big does it get? And you can do that through the lead alloy. You can do that through the jacket thickness, skive depth. There's all these things that you can do to control that, but it's not necessarily true that you need a bonded bullet to go over that speed. We generally don't go that fast, just because more velocity doesn't necessarily get you anything in the handgun world within what we have to work with, right? So if if we can get a bullet that works every bit as well at 1100 as 1200, then that's all the better, because there's, with the going from gun to gun to gun, there's differences in velocities and barrel lengths and things. So we're more interested in making the bullet work without having to push it so hard. But that being said, yeah, you start pushing it fast, and mainly through barriers, right, is where your bonding becomes the biggest advantage. Then it is good to have a chemically bonded bullet, potentially, but mechanically bonded works great too. And that's why the 9mm, like the 147 grain 9 HST, has got a double cantilever on it. That's to give us a mechanical bond between the jacket and core, and that works great. So
I never thought about it that way. I've got a couple more questions from people asking out here. Weston asks, can you expound on the choice of the 312 bullet size and compare that to other cartridges that use that size?
Yeah, it actually started with our first prototype was actually a cut down 30 carbine. And that was just as a proof of concept, just kind of like if we were going to do, and that's where 30 came from, right? It was early in the project. That's what one of the engineers just was playing with. We realized that we didn't want to go that way, just because the 30 carbine case was way thicker than it needed to be for what we were dealing with for the handgun round. So we kind of scrapped that idea and started playing with, okay, well, we can make the projectile a little bit bigger than that. We had a bunch of 312 diameter projectiles because we use them in 32 H&R and 327 Federal. It's also the same diameters which you'd see in 32 Auto, but in this case, that didn't help us, right? But we had some bullets that we could use to start doing proof of concept in 312 diameter, and tried some other diameter projectiles as well, but found that the 312 had the best balance of everything. Like, we could get a bullet that we could push fast, get it to open beautiful, get good penetration depth. It was really accurate. So it gave us that advantage of having a smaller loaded round, so that we could either have the gun companies could either make a smaller gun or just fit more rounds in the magazine. So it seemed to check all the boxes of giving us exactly what we were looking for without having to compromise anything. And that's why it just ended up kind of, it's not an uncommon diameter, right? Which is kind of there's cleaning kits out there that'll work for it and everything else. And it, even though it wasn't the same people who worked on 327 Federal that worked on 30 Super Carry, it was a different group of engineers, but we ended up coming to the same conclusion that this works really great. So now, it was some of the engineers who did the 327 Federal HST. So that was worked on by some of the same guys. And that load in 327 Federal is spectacularly good. So better than we envisioned it was going to be when we did 327 originally. So yeah.
And 327 is a revolver round, correct?
Correct. Yep, that is correct. Yep.
And so that was... Wait, am I correct? This is the one that back in the days when 380 was ruling the pocket pistols, and 327 was going to come out and give us 6-shot J-frames?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay. And then, 9mm got smaller, and people walked away from revolvers. So I was going to ask, is it possible that we get a J-frame with 30 Super Carry now, with, again, 6 shots or something?
It's entirely possible. There'd be nothing stopping anyone from doing that.
I suppose would probably be
the reality is, you've already got 32 H&R and 327 Federal, so you've already got 2 really good revolver cartridges with the 312 diameter projectiles. So you could potentially, for example, if somebody wanted to do something that took moon clips with a 30 Super Carry and shoot it out of a 327, you could. Now, that being said, the twist rates are different between the two. So it's something that you would need to play with just to see how it worked. But
that's interesting, though. So the 30 Super Carry already then potentially could give more life to somebody that has a 327 or a 32.
Yeah, potentially. That being said, we're having a really fantastic year for 327.
Okay, that's cool.
So we had some technical issues making it for a little while, and once we fired it back up again, it's been. I've got basically a loader that's making nothing but super carry 327 and 32 H&R. That's all it does now.
Is this was there a new revolver or something, or did somebody come out with a new revolver?
There's been some new revolvers. Henry did the lever action in 327, and then Taurus introduced a bunch of guns, and Ruger introduced some guns. So,
okay, I missed some stuff.
So there's a healthy number of 327s out there right now, and and we didn't understand just kind of how big the demand was, because for a while there we had some technical issues in making it, and then now every time we run it, it's gone in no time. So
that's cool. I'm glad to hear that. I really like the 327. I've never put a 327 next to a 30 super carry. How do they compare lengthwise?
There's more length in the 327. It is a hotter Magnum cartridge. So
okay, so you could definitely run the 30 super carry in their revolver then.
Yes, yeah. The 327 is even more even hotter than super carry. The 104 grain 327, if I remember correctly, is like at a 1525 velocity, whereas the 327 Federal, whereas 30 super carry 100 grain is 1250. So
okay.
327 is definitely a hotter Magnum.
And then I think we're out. Well, let's see. My last question over here was, has the super carry been portrayed in media yet? Any books or movies or anything? I mean, I'm sure a lot of YouTube videos, but
not that I'm aware of. I have had a couple writers ask me some questions because they wanted to get it technically accurate for stuff they were working on. But cool. I don't think anything's out there yet. I did think that was interesting, because I don't know that I've ever had anyone reach out like that before, but because it was so new, I expect it will be now, just because I've been asked about it. So
I think that, and this is just something in the past, because it's been out for a while, and we had a chance to chat. Rob is going to send me one of his pistols that he's doing in super carry now, and suggested that we chat. But, it's been around for a while. So we've chatted, in live conversations and stuff. We've chatted about it over the years. And dang, what was I going to say? As far as being, I guess what I was going to say is not as much being in media or whatever, but when we have conversations about it and people, just talking, would say, "Oh, what do we need another caliber for?" I think there's I don't know what to call it, like a need or an interest at least, but even maybe a need for generations to have something new. Pretty much we've all had something new to the field, the different eras or different generations of gun owners, and there's certainly new gun owners at the table now, and I can assume that, or I would assume that they'd be interested in, even if it isn't on paper or technically, or if there's been something better before or whatever, something new to the table is going to be right up somebody's alley that, is interested in whatever cutting edge. And I think that there's a valid point to fill that need.
You've got to keep innovating, right? Like, the world didn't know.
Oh, that's a much better way to say it. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah, I said, if we don't, then we're just sitting here, right? We're just looking backwards on it.
Otherwise, we'd still be using typewriters, right? I mean, it's like
typewriters were pretty good, right? But yeah, there is something better.
Yeah, there wasn't people who were good at typing that were like, man, this word processor is really going to change my life, right? You run into a certain amount of that anytime you do any kind of innovation, where people just are, I'm fine with what I've got, don't mess with it. And that's fine. I respect that too, but you've got to keep innovating and trying new things. And in this case, if we would have sat down and put it on the drawing board and would have seen no reason to do it, we would have stopped, right? there's a lot of time and money that goes into developing something new, and the big thing is too is that it takes time for adoption. Like I'm not worried about it. Like we're selling a nice amount of 30 super carry right now that's going to allow us to ramp up as more guns come to market. But especially after talking to the gun companies and they're hearing the same thing that we're hearing, which is, man, I'd like to have a little bit bigger gun with just a ton of rounds in it, right? Like once that happens, that's a whole nother wave of new interest in the product. So yeah, I'm you got to keep playing and innovating and seeing what's new. So
We got a question from Krabby over in Maryland. Are there 30 super carry barrels that can be swapped out to other pistols?
No, not. You can swap out barrels without too much issue. The problem is that the slides do need to be changed because your where your extractor and ejector and all of that is going to be different. So it requires an entire slide change out, and then because it is so much smaller than 9mm, there needs to be changes to the magazine. So that being said, there's nothing stopping somebody from developing a new slide and upper and magazine, and you just swap them out and convert it. And that's kind of like you mentioned, that's one of the things Rob figured out, is that he can do a new follower and make some tweaks to the magazine and do a new slide and upper, and people can just convert them. Smith can do the same thing, right? And I think they've actually talked about maybe doing that too, and just offering the like a conversion kit to super carry for guns. But it is more than just the barrel, and that it mainly has to do with, because it is so much smaller, trying to get that ejector and extractor lined up.
I would assume the magazine holding more is going to potentially have a different angle and whatever meet up too.
Yeah.
So makes sense.
Different follower and feed lips and stuff. Yeah.
So we've got a little time here, and we want to keep it about an hour, so we're not taking too much of Chris's time. But there are a bunch of people watching, so if you have any questions, feel free to keep throwing them out there. My last ones here are more just in general, because I'm kind of an ammo nerd. I guess my first one now is going to be: do you go to any of the ammo shows, any collector shows that happen around the country? Is that something that, working with ammo all day, do you get any? Do you get extracurricular ammo stuff?
Yeah. No, I don't so much. My hobbies are mainly around terminal ballistics. So I don't get to do much of that stuff, but I do study terminal ballistics a lot. So that's where my kind of extracurricular interest lies. Just understanding all of that, physics and physiology.
Interesting.
A lot of fun. So.
Do you guys have? Well, the question I was going to ask then. What's the? I've been watching some of the videos, some interviews. So I didn't want to ask the same questions as everybody. There's plenty of times you've done interviews where people ask, what's the difference between 9 and 380 and those kind of questions. But I noticed that you're on quite a few interviews. I know that you're at quite a few shows, but you're also developing product constantly. I'm assuming doing research and then all that travel time. What's the life of a project manager at is it the world's largest or one of the world's largest ammo companies? What's that like?
You gotta love it, because there's not work-life balance isn't a thing if you want to do a job like this, right? You gotta love it. So and that's fine, because I do. But thankfully most of the real heavy lifting is done by the engineering crew. So we've got really, really sharp people that work for us, and they know the ins and outs and all the right levers to pull, and they know everything about how the ammo gets built. So they do all of the really hard work. What I'd like to do mainly, I do a lot of just going to different stores and listening to conversations and shooting whenever I can, and studying everything I can. I spend an obscene amount of time on YouTube watching what everybody else is doing too, and mainly just because I want to see what's happening out there and what everybody else is seeing too. But we get a lot of good feedback. I mean, it's not unusual for me to have an autopsy report come across my desk, right? With use of our ammo or somebody else's, and what works and what doesn't work. So I try to just learn as much as I can about all of it, and all of the inputs are good. And especially you get an opportunity to talk to special operations from Brazil, for example, and they've got a lot of real world experience with sending bullets into bad guys. So it really just helps understanding that, and I just find it all really fascinating too. So it doesn't really ever turn off, is the thing. That's kind of part of being a product manager. You have to like the products. So
Very cool. So it sounds like, from what you're saying, then the science or the art, whatever it is, of terminal ballistics is still developing. It's not like it's all figured out, and it's just a matter of clocking in the morning and writing some equations down, and you got a new caliber. It sounds like you're constantly working on this stuff.
yeah, and it's as guns evolve, and materials change, right? Because your barriers change over time. The type of clothing that people wear over time can change. The constructions of cars and homes and everything changes over time, right? So it yeah, you get, you things just keep evolving. So it you got to kind of just evolve with it. It's more exciting for the rifle guys, right? Just because they have more to work with from a physics standpoint, and same with shot shell, because there you can do so much with those different payloads. In handgun, it's pretty well established, um, what makes it terminally effective, and really right now what we're just trying to do is, within those parameters, how do we get as good as you can possibly get, right? So there are some knowns, and a good example is like the 10 millimeter HST, where I get asked a lot, why didn't you make that faster? And well, the main reality is that you're up against Sammy Max with a lot of the loadings you can do in 10 millimeter. So you're making it potentially unsafe by going faster. And then the other thing is, can we achieve the same thing with good bullet design at a lower velocity and not have to make it unsafe to accomplish that? And so that's some of the things you learn over time, with the science improving, right? Like that. I actually saw a YouTube video where a guy did that. He took our 10 millimeter, pulled bullets, loaded it super hot, and ended up doing exactly the same thing as it did in the load that we had from the factory, right? So it's designed to do that. So
It's like part of it is trends and fashion, I guess, what people are interested in, and what their the calibers that they're buying and the new guns that they buy it for.
yeah, exactly. And that's like the Hydroshock Deep. That was a good example of evolution. We did Hydroshock Deep in 940 and 45 initially, just thinking it was going to be kind of the next version of the Hydroshock. But then as we did the 38 Special and the 380, it turns out that bullet design changes what we can accomplish with 380 and 38 Special. So it was it that bullet just allowed us to approach it in a totally different way. So
On this subject, and you say this question is one of the problems with terminal ballistic science that there isn't enough real world evidence. For obvious reasons, we don't get the grisly details from stuff that happens in the real world.
we do. So it's not something they generally share out to the public, right? But once the court cases are all settled and everything else, we do hear what works and doesn't work, and also understanding that we have 70% market share in law enforcement, right? So generally speaking, if bad guy gets stopped, it's with one of our rounds. So we there is enough real world data to understand what works and doesn't work. It's just it's not something you come out to the public and talk proudly about generally, right? It's a sensitive matter, because at the end of the day, you are sending a bullet into a person. So amount of data isn't too bad. it's just if you have access to it. And the other thing is the FBI has been studying it in detail for decades now, right? So they do look at all of that and figure out what in their mind worked and didn't work. And we do have a problem that people misunderstand what we try to accomplish with things like ballistics gel. And another big misconception is people think that clear gel is ballistics gel, right? And it does not work the same as organic gel. It actually does not have very good correlation, and it has very different mechanical properties. So it applies force to things like an expanding hollow point very differently. And so when you see people use clear ballistics for testing, that does not reflect real world, is an important thing. And then when we're using calibrated gel, it's not because it necessarily reflects real world literally. It's because there's been so much data collected that we can do that correlation. We can translate what we see in calibrated organic ballistics gel to what that means in the real world, because there's been so much data collected and comparison done. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I've always thought of the gel as just being for consistency, so that because
Yeah,
a leg isn't a leg, but a chunk of gel is a chunk of gel.
Yeah, there's infinite variability in the real world. So what we're trying to do is have a controlled way to collect data, and then what that data tells us, we have enough real world correlation to compare it to understand with a high level of confidence what it'll mean in the world, right? So
right, like you can apply it to real world on your own, on the data for one caliber, and then on the new caliber you can assume, is what you're saying, kind of extrapolate what it's going to.
Correct. Yep.
Do. Pretty good odds.
Yeah.
Something that came up here, just as a totally off question, I guess, when you're working with different, like, let's say, government, police, military type of things, especially international, do they start asking for parameters or different characteristics or something that are like just so far off that it's frustrating, or do they all pretty much fall in the same line of what they're asking for?
Yeah, they're usually pretty good about it. You do get some weird requests, right? Because you get some, every once in a while, someone will want you to design a really terminally effective full metal jacket, right? Because they have this idea that, well, hollow points and things like that are evil, and we need it to be an FMJ, or they just don't run in guns. So you get some weird stuff like that, but for the most part, they're pretty straightforward in their requests. You might, depending on where they are in the world, they might have some lead-free requirements, or it depends on what guns they've got, right? Because there's some places in Asia that just run 38 special revolvers still to this day. So it is interesting to see kind of what you get requests for from there, but a lot of them understand enough to kind of trust us to come up with what's going to work. We do see some variability even within domestic law enforcement. It's the FBI protocol is pretty well universally understood as a collection of data, but the FBI's interpretation of what is the critical guidelines isn't necessarily going to align with everybody in law enforcement. An example would be there's a lot of police departments that are willing to give up some penetration depth in favor of a larger upset size based on their experiences, right? So that's why we have so many different loads, because there isn't just one universal set of parameters of the interpretation of the data. So the FBI protocol is the best way to collect data, and I do firmly believe that because we've got so much good correlation that we can do there. But the interpretation of that can still vary from customer to customer.
Appreciate that. I can only assume that's got to be the fun part of it, is dealing with a the various different types of bureaucracies. They're never fun in any case, but having multiple ones
Yeah,
is kind of fun to juggle.
yeah, it gets a little challenging, or somebody decides they want a bullet to be a certain color so that it's clearly visually identifiable, and it's fine. It's if that works for how what their TTPs are, then we're gonna go with it, right? If that's what works for them, but yeah, it is surprising sometimes when you get a request like that.
Well, Chris, I appreciate your time. We've chatted for an hour, and I hope we've asked some questions that people or that you haven't heard before. And we know that a couple of them are going to ask or address questions that our listeners came up with. But yeah, it's super cool to hear about a new caliber. Like I say, I'm kind of an ammo nerd. I like it, and I like the history of it. Shooting it is fun, but it's the stuff that feeds our guns, and there's just it's often overlooked. So it's a fun thing for me. It's been a fun thing to research, and to be able to talk to someone who's been involved in a brand new one is a real treat. So I really appreciate your time. And if I can ever help you with any kind of getting the word out on anything, you got my number. Let me know. Happy to do it. And why don't I let you have the last words here? If you want to let people know where to find you or how to contact you, if that's something you want to do, or where to get 30 Super Carry.
Yeah, well, it's there's plenty of good information on the website, and you can reach out to us through social media and things like that too. But I don't have any personal contact information or something that I share out, mainly just because the volume gets to be pretty nuts. But you send questions in through social media or through our product service team. It might take them a little while to get back again because they're just really busy. But they always they come to me if there's something they can't answer, and I appreciate you giving us the time. I especially in something like Super Carry, right, where it can be a little polarizing, and the launch timing was a little tough, in that people were having a hard time finding other stuff at that time, and that was just a unfortunate side effect of that's when we were done developing it. So it's kind of, do you sit on it and wait, or do you take it to market? And I'm excited about it. I love what we do. We make great ammo here in America, and I'm happy to keep doing it. So I appreciate everybody supporting us.
Right on. So I'll just end the show here, and we can chat real quick off air here. But thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll be back tomorrow with the coaching show.